Education Underground, a podcast that explores all things education, some things underground. I am Dr. J. I'm a deeper guide for local schools because I believe in supporting your local neighborhoods, exploring topics around education. Is that okay to say, man? Yeah? Okay, brilliant. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're live. Episode 2 of Education Underground. Welcome to Shades of Green Multimedia, also known as the Whisper Room. There's a faint scent of sulfur in the air. We experienced, actually a neighbor experienced a bit of a fire, so if I cough or sneeze, I do apologize in advance. It adds patina to the podcast. Wouldn't you agree, Matt? Totally. We love the patina in our podcast. Classic. So, a new feature for this week's podcast, books we're reading. I'm reading 2 books on the survival of the soul. One is called Catching Fire. I had to give it back to the library because it was overdue, so I couldn't bring it in. I'm considering buying it. The other one is Deep Survival. And it talks about, I guess, basically who lives, who dies, and why. And Catching Fire is about altered states of consciousness in terms of how we meditate or the things that we seek out in our lives to become stronger and better at the things that we do. So I highly recommend both of those books, Catching Fire and Deep Survival. Who lives, who dies, and why. I'm Dr. J, your host, not the one who played for the 76ers, although in my next life I'm coming back with an afro and a headband. That's a guaranteed. We're produced, sponsored, facilitated by Shades of Green Multimedia, my good friend Matt Rogerson. And today we're joined by one of his crack interns, Tiffany, who hails from the beautiful Provo, Orem, Springville, Mapleton area in Utah. Wonderful area. Spent my required 4.5 years there back in 1990. We'll just leave it at that. Today's topics, we're going to be talking about all things social services and education. And then to lighten the mood, we're going to be talking about mascots. I have a thing for mascots, and we're going to discuss that. No guests today, although I do want to make mention of a good friend of mine who prompted me to talk about this topic in social services, my friend Dondre Campbell, who runs Safe Place to Talk and helps out individuals and schools and families who need support and contacts in the community. So that's today's show, and we hope that you can like, share, and subscribe, and make sure that we increase our outreach to members of the community who need this information. It's very important to me as an educator and to other educator friends of mine that we do everything that we can to promote awareness and information sharing. So like, share, and subscribe. And we're live on Facebook. All things social services. These are some outdated statistics, but I wanted to share with the audience one that's sort of a mind-boggling number. The number of dropouts in Arizona high schools per year. Think about that. How many students and at what age drop out every year in Arizona high schools? The number is staggering. It's over 20,000. 20,000 kids drop out of school in Arizona. Now, I've had some interesting people say some really controversial things about that number and which demographics, socioeconomics, and races of people are included in that figure. As far as I'm concerned, we're all Arizonans. Native born, native tribes, and otherwise. So we're included in that statistic. And I include all of the people who live and grow up here in Arizona in that statistic. 20,000 kids drop out. What does that mean? Well, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce put out a number that is astonishing. If you think about the contribution of a high school graduate to the income tax infrastructure in a county or a city. So take your individual high school graduate, how much in their lifetime will they contribute to the income tax or property tax or that tax infrastructure in their county or city? And it's $1 million, roughly, give or take. Let's do some math. I'm not a math guy, but I know there's some of you out there who are, so we'll do a little bit of math. We'll try to make it easy for those of us who didn't do well in math. Take that number of dropouts, multiply that by the number of dollars that they would have contributed to the tax infrastructure, and you end up with about $20 million that we lose every year towards the infrastructure in our communities. Well, where does that $1 million go? What does it go to? Well, it goes to police, fire, first responders. It goes to social services, things like helping folks who might need an extra hand, a little help, job training, skills training, relocation services. It goes to counseling and support in schools, out of schools. It does go to rehabilitation and services for those who've been incarcerated for different and various crimes. It goes to drug counseling. It goes to marriage counseling. All those services that we, as a culture, as a state, as a nation, and as a world, value in helping one another grow and succeed. That's what we're missing per year by virtue of the number of the students that drop out of high school. So what are the risk factors that contribute to high school dropouts? Well, we kind of know that students who aren't reading at grade level by third grade, so aren't reading at the third grade level by the time they get to third grade, are at risk for dropping out. We know at seventh grade, if students who aren't performing at their grade level in the core subjects are at risk at dropping out. We know by their sophomore year, those third and seventh grade benchmark scores will give us some fairly strong predictive analytics about what their success rate is going to be by the time they reach their sophomore year in high school. So there's the academic side. What about the social side? Well, there's a lot of controversy and a lot of information about how the social infrastructure impacts the life of a student. Well, let's just take at two-parent families, divorce rates, rates of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, rates of suicide attempts or mental illness, rates of poor physical health. For us here in Arizona, we have a high demographic, a high population of students who suffer double the national average of juvenile diabetes and who are at risk for heart disease and stroke in their 20s. So that's a risk factor for dropping out. We also see high-risk behaviors in terms of being affiliated with or associated with, in any way, shape, or form, the gangs or crews, as they're being called. So while Arizona admittedly ranks in the bottom 5 to 10 in terms of pupil funding, per pupil funding, school funding, and academic performance, we rank in the top 15 to top 10 in the nation in terms of those risk indicators, those risk factors for high school dropouts. As I mentioned, poor academic performance, single-parent homes, low income, lack of access to health care, lack of access to field trips, field experiences outside of their home, opportunities to do recreation. We have in Arizona, all across the city, here in Phoenix and in Maricopa County, food and recreation islands where students don't have access to after school, before school, or summer recreation programs. And they also have limited access to healthy foods and healthy food choices. So for example, some of our students, if there's an extra bit of money, they might find themselves at a convenience store rather than a grocery store, and convenience stores have limited options for healthy food choices. We have high rates of suicide attempts, high rates of teen pregnancy, high rates of drug and alcohol abuse, all among our teenage populations. So these are all high risk factors that are already added to, correlated with, and causal to many of the statistics that we see in terms of the number of students that are dropping out of school here in Arizona. That is tapping our tax infrastructure in the tens of millions of dollars. Now, we all know that that would be a huge benefit to us as a city to be able to have those monies, those funds. I can't imagine any mayor of any city turning down an extra 10 to 15 to $20 million to be able to support programs like recreation, after-school programs, or outreach programs that would enhance their neighborhoods. So why is it that we're so averse to funding programs that will support kids in schools? It's curious to me, and I think about it a lot as a school director, as an adjunct faculty member, as a consumer of public education, whose children currently attend public schools, public district schools. Why are the first people that we cut from our schools the social workers and the psychologists? Why are some of the first programs that we ditch those outreach programs that help connect our children, our scholars, our most precious resource, to those relationships that will help them succeed in junior high and high school? Where is the conversation about we can pay for it now or we're going to pay for it later? Think about that high school dropout. What are their career choices? And I'm not making a judgment call here. I'm just basically running the statistics of it. I'm saying to the listeners out there, to Stuart Jackson, to all those who are giving us props right now on our live feed, they know the impact of on the life of a high school dropout. Even if you get your GED, how it limits and narrows your choice menu in career options, how it puts you at greater risk for things like drug and alcohol abuse, incarceration, mental health issues, a lack of connection in your community, teen pregnancy. All of those things that I just mentioned tap the infrastructure to a greater degree over a longer period of time. Let me clarify. If I were to drop out of school in my sophomore year, I am at a greater risk of being incarcerated, and that costs my city and my county. I'm at a greater risk of attending drug and alcohol abuse counseling, which also costs the infrastructure of my city and my county. I'm at a greater risk of being a single parent or creating a single parent situation, which also taps the infrastructure of my city and my county to the tune of tens and millions of dollars over my lifetime. I put myself on a path by virtue of dropping out of school for whatever the reasons are, whether it's things that I can or can't control. It's a choice that I felt I had to make, and I've now put myself on a path that narrows my opportunities to get involved and engaged in the community in a meaningful way, to add to that tax infrastructure, to be a contributing member of society. Just by virtue of dropping out, I'm at risk for all of the things that I just mentioned. And that costs cities, counties, and states millions of dollars. Now multiply me by all the dropouts. You have 20,000 me's running around, and that is a force multiplier of diminishing returns on a zero investment that a community is making in education. In other words, they're saying, well, we can't fund education. We're not going to fund education. It's just not there. We don't have the money to do that. Okay, so you're going to pay for it later on because you're putting children at risk, or you're contributing to the risk factors in their lives, and eventually you're going to build more prisons. You're going to have to. You're going to have to build more clinics. You're going to have to staff those clinics. You're going to have to put into place more taxpayer dollars to fund social services and outreach programs for people coming out of incarceration, job skills training, when the alternative is to fund education, social services on the front end. We can predict children who are at risk in third grade. Why not put into place any or all of those social services that will help mitigate the pressures of the school life? We know their home situations. We know that we can reach out and provide counseling services to single parents, that we can refer them to agencies like Mountain Park Health Centers, family community health centers all across Arizona, social services and outreach programs that will help them find the resources that they need to create a viable home and school life that increases their chances of keeping them in school. Why aren't we doing that? Why won't we fund that? It's ridiculous to think that in a capitalist society, or in a society that runs on the engine of capitalism, that any business would not look at that investment opportunity and say, well, gosh, if I can contribute dollars to public education in the form of a partnership, a mentoring program, a tutoring, an after-school club, sponsoring a teacher running a club after school, and that makes it so that it decreases the likelihood of students dropping out over the short and the long term, that's a great return on the investment. I might be creating, instead of a pipeline for prisons, a pipeline for partnerships, for job skills, for mentoring, for partnerships, for culling jobs, skilled members of our communities to come to work for me while they're attending trade school, community college, while they're in the military, after the military, while they're in a four-year university. It's beyond me why those who are in charge, or say that they are in charge, aren't willing to have a very serious conversation about public school funding when it comes to social services. And when we look at an individual who's medically in crisis, the big C word, cancer touches all of our lives. We either have experienced it ourselves or we know someone who has. We would not expect a doctor to do anything other than place the person who has cancer in a comprehensive care situation. We take care of the mental, spiritual, the physical, the nutritional, all the aspects to ensure the survival of that human being. Because we all recognize that cancer is a horrible situation and it takes so many good people from us. And yet, we're in a crisis situation in education where we can predict the existence of the dropout cancer. We can see kids who are at risk for dropping out. And the answer that we get from the funding sources around the comprehensive care model for those students is, can't afford it. We can't afford to take care of the heart. We can't afford to take care of the nutrition. Barely can afford to take care of the mind. So you're just going to have to make do. No doctor, no lawyer, no first responder would ever recommend that when it would come to the care of their client or patient. It just wouldn't happen. We're just going to have to make do with this battery-operated defibrillator, and we're not sure if it's going to work or not, but it's the best we've got. So forgive my cynicism, ladies and gentlemen, but when I look across the playground or down the hall at a 10-year-old who I know is struggling at home, and then I look at my budget or my resources, and I'm struggling to meet the needs of that individual 10-year-old, and I'm listening to the news and I'm hearing the responses from our politicians and for those individuals who are making decisions around the purse strings, it's hard for me to have hope. And I think that my disposition, my attitude, my mindset is one that's shared across education. It's like what we talked about last week, ladies and gentlemen. The bottom line is that the teachers here in America, here in Arizona, are doing more with less than has ever been done in the history of this nation. Educating more and more difficult situations with fewer resources than we've ever done. And across the board, the numbers bear out that we're doing a remarkable job, except when it comes to those at-risk behaviors and those at-risk circumstances that point to a huge number of dropouts. And it's not decreasing, it's increasing. So I'm putting up solutions to you and the public, and we talked about last year, or last episode, I've talked my whole entire career, 22 years about this. Solutions are the same, ladies and gentlemen. They are demand of your legislators adequate funding and reasonable resources that increase partnership-based relationships between schools, community agencies, private industry, corporate industries, government agencies that can mitigate and eliminate all of those at-risk indicators for students as early as 8 years old and all the way through their sophomore year. If we can get a student, a scholar, a child through their sophomore year, we're pretty sure they're going to pass. We can get them through, we can get them finished, and they can have a menu of choices that give them opportunities to succeed in this country. It's not a perfect system and it's not a perfect menu of options, but it's way better than dropping out. It's way better than tapping that infrastructure, 20,000 kids a year, $20 million a year, and the cost to the infrastructure over the lifetime of a high school dropout in terms of incarceration, drug and alcohol counseling, and all those other things that I listed, it's almost incalculable. I would venture a guess that if we ran the numbers on that, we would be astonished at how much it's costing us, when the alternative is pure and simple: an extra $50,000 in the budget of every school in Arizona to help with a comprehensive care model of a child who's at risk for dropping out would ensure a return investment of $1 million per child with just a high school education over their lifetime. That's an exceptional return on that $50,000 investment. And I, at my school and in my professional life, know colleagues who have done the same, partner with organizations who are willing to offer social services, counseling, family services, connecting families with resources in the community at reduced costs, at reduced rates. They can write federal grants to help schools. They need the incentives to be able to start those partnerships. They're individuals who are skilled and trained in networking and doing these things, but they're, and oftentimes in large districts, tapped to the limit in terms of who they can help. We need more resources in terms of bodies and a small amount of money, and we can open up the doors and do the partnering ourselves. So I think it bears consideration, ladies and gentlemen, talking about running the numbers. Go to the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, go to the City of Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, City of Tucson Chamber of Commerce, all great organizations who partner in a robust fashion with charter school associations, with district schools, and ask them how dropouts impact the communities. In particular, I've been able to work with Matt off and on over the last 8 years. His good wife, Kara, does Mind for the Making. She's a creative genius. The two of them together build universes of creativity. So we're here in the Whisper Room. There's a lot of other individuals who do podcasts, sound mixing, interns who work with us. As I mentioned, we're here with Tiffany. So reach out to Shades of Green Multimedia and see what they can do for strategic marketing, intentional marketing around social media, any of the kind of outreach that you want to do. Matt's got the answer. So do what you can. His contact information is on Facebook. I know he's on all things social media, Instagram, the Twitters, the intranets, the interwebs, all of that, right, Matt?
I'm there.
He's there. Shades of Green Multimedia. Reach out, see what you can do. All right, let's switch tracks a little bit. Something a little lighter. Mascots. Do we have time? Got time. Mascots. I just have a question, and it could be a little bit rhetorical for some of you out there, but why are all the mascots fighting? Why are they always on performance-enhancing mascot drugs? Clearly, they're using steroids. They're angry. All the mascots are angry, and they're going to war. And I've never understood that. Even as a kid, well, my high school mascot was a longhorn. Now, for those of you bovine experts out there, a longhorn is a cow most often associated with Texas, and they're pretty docile animals unless antagonized, but they don't stand up on their hind legs and box. They don't wear clothes. They don't lift weights. They don't play football. They don't wrestle. They eat and poop a lot. And yet that was my high school mascot. And it was a male. It wasn't a female. And yet I went to school with a lot of females. Another example of a really interesting mascot up there in the fair state of Utah. No offense to I think it's the South Jordan, West Jordan, somebody. Beet diggers? Seriously? And the beet digger guy is wearing overalls. And again, he's yoked, ladies and gentlemen. He's not the mild farmer beet digger guy. This guy is beating people with a shovel, and he clearly plays football. He wears a very broad hat and chews on a piece of hayseed or whatever. I don't get it. And I didn't know that beet diggers were only males. There's no female beet diggers out there? Are we still digging beets, ladies and gentlemen? No offense to those who have dug beets in the past or are currently digging beets. I don't know if you wanted to be associated with being a mascot of a high school. Here in Scottsdale Community College, we have the Fighting Artichokes. I don't know about you, but the last artichoke I had no fight in it at all. It laid there in a pool of butter and brought me great satisfaction. So we look around the United States, we have hundreds of examples. I drove past a school right here in West Phoenix. On the way here to the Whisper Room, Shades of Green Multimedia, shout out, like, share, and subscribe. And they had a dolphin on their marquee. And it wasn't a nice dolphin. It was an angry dolphin, jumping at something with its mouth open, its teeth bared. Again, I thought dolphins were kind, fairly docile animals. I don't know, live in the ocean. But again, why are we choosing to represent mascots on just the male side of it? Or maybe it's an angry female dolphin. I didn't know that was the case. Scorpions are always chosen here in Arizona. You got the Gila monsters. You have in Yuma. Shout out to the folks in Yuma who aren't listening, but maybe will be at some point. The Yuma Criminals, territorial prison way back in the day before we were a state, and they're still going with the criminal thing, not a female criminal. It's a male. It's a hardened individual wearing the black and white striped outfit and the beanie, because as we know, all criminals wear that outfit. It's the association with the mascot thing here in the great nation of the United States of America astounds me. But everywhere you go, every state you drive through, you can count on seeing a representation of a school mascot that is violent, is interested in having a bare knuckle brawl, and it's all about the fight, and it's characterized with the male thing. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, he's a feminist. I'm not. I don't really understand the meaning of that word, to be really honest with you. Maybe somebody can educate me later on down the road. But I'm not advocating that we prop up violent female mascots to represent our schools, nor am I saying that we should get rid of the mascots that we currently have. It's just the question, what's the deal with all the violent male mascots who want to fight? And the alternative, again, because I'm all about solutions, is, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, but I have respect. It's just the name. Ravensclaw, right? Is that one of the, and then there's the Hufflepuff. I don't even know what that means. But there's nobody with their mouth open eating the entrails of their defeated foe. It's just the name of something. And then if you look at the soccer clubs, the football, depending on which you choose, FUTBOL or soccer outside the United States, it's, let's pick one of the ones my son follows. Shout out to Eli. Chelsea. That's just the name of the city, I think. Then there's Manchester City, Manchester United. I chose Arsenal as the team that I would follow because they have a cannon on their shirt. So that goes back to my days in the Army and the artillery, so I thought that was kind of cool. But there's nobody beating anybody up. I guess they made cannons in the same city where Arsenal comes from at some point, so that's why they chose that. But there are plenty of examples of clubs outside of the United States that don't represent the violent side or the male steroid-enhanced, performance-enhanced using mascots that are beating people up. So I just put that out there for you to think about. If you get the chance to open a school, maybe consider mixing it up a little bit. No mascot? Ooh, Real Salt Lake. That's a good one. My daughter Rachel up there in the fair city of Reno. Wonderful. She's saying Real Salt Lake. Do they have a mascot?
It's a logo.
It's just a logo. Tiffany's telling me it's just a logo. Terrific. So there you go. Another example. Real Salt Lake. Thanks, Rach. Love you and miss you. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up today's episode 2 of Education Underground. Big thanks to Matt here at Shades of Green Multimedia in the Whisper Room. Thanks to Tiffany for their support. With this faint hint of Salter in the room, we hope we've done a good job of keeping everybody engaged, teaching everybody, and enlightening you as to what's available to consider this current state of education, the investment that it's required to keep it going, to support our nation's greatest resource, our most valuable resource, its children. We look forward to seeing you next week for episode 3. And reach out to us. Like, share, and subscribe. Email us at undergrounded@gmail.com. Tell us what kinds of topics you want to hear about. Bullying, parent rights, how to choose a school, how to talk to your teacher in a parent conference, what kinds of questions to ask. We're here to help and support you in making sure that we highlight all the good that's going on in education here in Arizona and across this great nation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have yourself a wonderful day.